Great. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm glad you could all come to the Warrant Committee meeting tonight. We have been posted tonight along with the Town Government Study Committee. I think we have a quorum of the Town Government Study Committee here, and they are led by Chairman Rick Neely, and we have Peter Mullen and John Cronin, Mary McNamara, Marion McKettrick, Frank Giuliano, and
maybe Kathy Fagan instead of Mary.
oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I couldn't quite see you there.
Marvin Gordon.
Same area.
And
Marvin
Gordon. And we have the town administrator and the chair of the Board of Selectmen here as well, Katie Conlon. So, we're here to talk about 5 articles that the Town Government Study Committee has brought to us. And we'll take them up in order. And I think the first one will be Article 7 in this year's warrant, and it involves the establishment of an IT committee, an audit committee. And if you consult your town report, you'll see that the current audit committee has been authorized by 3 different articles, basically in different town meetings going back to the 50s, I think. And basically the most recent financial management review from the Division of Local Services, Department of Revenue, suggested that we give the folks on the audit committee a foundation in the bylaw. So, take it away, Rick.
Thanks, Ted. I'm Rick Neely, Chairman of the Town Government Study Committee, and tell me how much you need to know about the Department of Revenue report. Have you already given them a background on how we end up requesting that, and the Board of Selectmen and the school committee request all of that?
Well, it wouldn't be, we do have some new members. I did this fall, I guess the required reading was the Town Government Study Committee report from April of 13. I think that's when it first came out. And then I think the Financial Management Review from the Division of Local Services leaned heavily on that, but elaborated on it and came up with recommendations on which you're acting to bring them, some of them to town meeting floor, and we have 6 articles from your committee this spring. I think that pretty much.
Yeah, the Department of Revenue does provide these services across the Commonwealth to cities and towns, and so this was the first chance for Milton to take advantage of that. Historically, Milton has not taken advantage of it. Well over 200 cities and towns have done that, so that was a free consultation, if you will. We don't necessarily agree with everything they recommend, but certainly there are a series of good suggestions.
Yes, especially the stuff they wrote about the warrant committee.
Well, actually, I was going to tell you that the quorum article evolved out of a conversation Ted and I had and talked about the recommendations in this report. So if I digress for a minute, the quorum article, ironically, is for the reverse reason, that our committee was not enthusiastic about the recommendations in that report and felt that the issues that were identified in that report could be better addressed by the quorum article. So I'm a little bit ahead of myself, but that's the irony of an example where the article came out because we weren't in supportive of their recommendation to reduce the size of the warrant committee. So, but let me start off with the audit committee first. The audit committee article is intended to strengthen the audit committee process in town, designed to create some more independence and greater powers and duties. And we put this together, and the article contains some of the information that you've seen in the Department of Revenue. Certainly in terms of information that I was able to gather, in terms of what an audit committee should be composed of. Selectman Tom Hurley certainly had a lot of contribution to this as well. You recall also there was an article, I think a year ago, that was initially proposed, and I think it was withdrawn regarding the audit committee, and it's referenced in the Department of Revenue material. So the article that we are presenting to you tonight for consideration by the town meeting is based upon all of that and continues the practice of having the audit committee appointed by the moderator and we described some minimum qualifications or consideration for the members of the committee. And we also have some criteria there in terms of who's not eligible to be on the committee. And we point out that the audit committee, really, we expanded their role by asking that they be responsible for developing the scope of the audit services. And we believe that the people that will meet the qualifications to be appointed to this committee will know enough in terms of being able to provide a detailed scope of services, including the review of internal controls. And then the review of internal controls frequently generates recommendations in a management letter. And we referenced that in terms of, when you get into the article, that the recommendations for internal controls and the reviews of that be reported to town meeting. That's something new. Currently, the audit is reported to the Board of Selectmen. That would continue, but we would then take it a further step, and the audit committee would report to the annual town meeting on the ongoing compliance with the management letter and the internal control recommendations. So the key point is that the responsibilities of the audit committee are not just to produce and have the financial statements reviewed, but it really is to be sure that the town is following the best practices and internal controls that are required by the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB. The hope here is to have an article that provides for an audit committee that is a combination of what is needed in a nonprofit and a for-profit sector. So that's the goal here.
Can we interrupt you here, Rick? Paul?
Rick, could you please explain internal controls? I mean, people watching on TV may not know exactly what that refers to.
Well, the internal controls would be in terms of the procedures that are being followed by the individual departments in the town, such as the town treasurer's office, the town accountant's office, or any of the operations that are working with money or have receipts. And it would discuss the processes for example, the cash receipts. What are the steps involved in the cash receipts? What are the practices for do the cash receipts sit in the drawer for a week, or in fact are they deposited daily in the bank? Another case would be, how are funds expended? What are the processes for getting approvals on the funds to be processed? Are they following state guidelines? Department of Revenue in the state has guidelines in terms of accounting rules. So the internal controls would be checking to see whether in fact the town is adhering to what the state has prescribed and what the best practices are within the financial industry.
Very good, thank you.
Welcome. So in terms of the article itself, I'm not sure if people have questions on it, but again, the key point here is the committee really will have a far more active approach than in the past in terms of developing and administering the selection process, recommending the appointment to the Board of Selectmen for an appointment of the independent accounting firm. And the Board of Selectmen would, after meeting with the audit committee, would discuss that and share it with other boards and officials. And the key thing is to get buy-in from all the other elected officials and appointed boards as appropriate. And we think that at the end of the process, the audit committee should come back in and then review the performance and independence of the audit firm and report that to the selectmen. So we did add that final sentence in terms of the audit committee itself is not the one that's certifying the financial statements. It is, in fact, obviously, the town's staff, management staff, as well as the audit firm conducting the audit. So I'm open to questions.
Yeah, the management letter that's produced by the audit service, can that be published on the town website or anything like that in advance of town meeting?
It could be, yes, it could be.
Because just getting a report on the letter is great, but generally it takes a little bit of time to read these, and if they're just if the letter is just being reported on at town meeting, then it's kind of hard to absorb it.
The timing of that would be after the presentation to the Board of Selectmen. And so
Right.
when the audit committee and the Board of Selectmen have concluded their meeting, after that, it's a public document and it should be posted it's available to be posted to the website, or it should be available.
Yeah, that'd be great on the town meeting website, on the town meeting page. Darnell?
Quick question. For me, it's like, what are some of the things that signified the need for this change or the need for the embodiment of empowering this audit committee to do these things? What were the deficiencies can you explain or identify some deficiencies in our present process over and why we need some of this, why we need this audit?
I wouldn't use the word deficiencies. Really go back and look at best practices. If you look at the best practices that occur in other towns and other cities, municipal operations as well as state operations, and as pointed out in the Department of Revenue report, the idea is that the way the committee has operated in Milton in the past hasn't been empowered. It hasn't had the authority to go out, for example, and do the audit selection, the firm selection, to define the scope of services. It's really been internally generated, the scope of services, and now we're asking these 5 citizens, 3 of whom, at least as you read the qualifications, they would be developing the scope of services based upon their own experiences and based upon what they believe is in the best interest of the taxpayers. So it goes from an internally driven product initially, with the outside being our taxpayers and our citizens, the 5 citizens presenting the scope, and then there's a more active review process, and there's a more active process at the conclusion, whereby we have the town meeting involved in hearing the report and understanding what's been presented. So I think there's a greater engagement of the citizens in this.
One of the reasons I asked, and I understand that, and I do think we do need a more robust audit committee myself, but one of the things I want to ask, because now we're asking you to take the power out of the hands of, like, our treasurer, town administrator, and those folks who basically are there to kind of oversee the town finance. Are we asking this 5 citizen committee to supplant what they think might be necessary for the town?
I think we're trying to clearly identify an independence that we'd like to see. So you want to see, I mean, this is the way the article is written, so the moderator is still the appointer of these 5 members of the committee. So the idea is to be sure that there is an independence throughout the whole process, and that the Board of Selectmen, for example, aren't perceived as hiring the auditors, and therefore the financials are reviewing their own financials, and there's some vested interest. So I think the independence is an important aspect. And as you've seen, we're working on financial recommendations. There is an existing school and town committee that's working on internal practices. And I think the goal there is to be sure that as the town internally centralizes some of the functions and looks for its own efficiencies, that we have a third, have an outside view, if you will, and it circles back to the independence.
I've got Steve, Kevin, and then Steve.
Me? Yeah, Rick, I really want to say something on TV that I think everybody should know. I've known Rick.
It's okay, we're not live tonight.
Oh, we're not?
But we are on
Never
tape.
mind.
We're on tape. We're on tape. It'll be showed Saturday morning at 6 a.m.
I've known Rick for over 50 years, and I have to say, I am truly impressed by the amount of volunteer work that you have done for the town. I know you worked as a school committee member. I know you were a member of the Board of Selectmen. I know you did the actuarial study for the retirement system. And now I know you're doing the town government study, and you were also a member and chair of the Warrant Committee. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I would just like to thank you personally for that
Thanks,
record. It's really something to be proud of.
I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Well, now you're probably thinking, but... No, this is an easy question. You mentioned the school department. Is the school business operations going to be part of the audit?
Yes. It's anything that is handling money in the town. And, for example, if you look at there has been recommendations in the past on the existing letters about school activity funds. And so there are recommendations that delve into the schools, and that would continue to be the practice here. I think, frankly, the internal difficulty is that probably all the town departments might feel a little more pressure out of this. That's because of the fact that the independence of it and the fact that it would be reporting to town meeting.
Right, and I'm glad you said that, but having I was going to say suffered through 28 audits, but I don't know if suffered is the right word, but it is an ordeal. And now that it's going to be reported to town meeting, you don't know how glad I am that I'm not here. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Kevin.
Steve?
Hey, Rick. Is the audit committee going to run the procurement for the auditing services or participate in the procurement or the re-procurement as time goes by?
Yes, I mean, they're gonna be essentially responsible for the selection of the firm.
Okay.
The selectmen, do the final appointment, but they would have a hard time, frankly, objecting to the appointment. They'd have to have a good reason, they could, but, if you're on the board of selectmen, you sit back and say, how does this look if I turn down the recommendation of the audit committee? But-
And do we know how periodically that's supposed to happen? I mean, they're on a 3-year cycle now. Is it that going to continue? It doesn't really speak to it at all in here, but
That's open.
some of
That's-
our other professional services contracts in the town seem kind of open-ended. And, the more often that they're re-procured, to my perspective, it's a good management practice for financials. So I'm glad to see that there's something in there for it.
Yeah, this would be within the scope of the committee to decide whether they want to do a 1-year, 2-year, or 3-year. We didn't prescribe that they couldn't hire the same firm. And what's interesting, by the way, is if you look at the procurement laws, Chapter 30B provides a specific exemption for CPAs for the audits. So if you hire an accounting firm to do internal accounting work, it's subject to 30B, the Procurement Act. But there's a carve-out for the employment of certified professional accountants for the purposes of the audit. So it's just it's one of the rare exceptions under the professional services. But this committee would certainly have the ability to determine whether it would be a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year RFP.
Thanks, Rick.
Betty?
What mechanisms are in place if, let's say, they do flag an issue, internal control issue, or some kind of financial issue, either given the independence of an elected treasurer, an elected school committee, if the audit committee or the auditors find some major issue, how does that get resolved, given the fact that all of these independent entities are involved in the town? And how can the audit committee help with that, if at all?
Well, the first thing is that as the audit committee goes through this, the audit firm, if it finds something that it questions, needs to go back to the department and agency involved and give that agency or department a chance to respond and say, hey, that's, is that a fair analysis, and determine whether, in fact, it's like an exit interview. So you have to give people an opportunity to at least be able to comment on that.
Okay.
But eventually, what's going to happen is each year, the audit gets presented to the Board of Selectmen and the Audit Committee in a public meeting. And at that meeting, if there were some issues that had come up, that would be identified during that process. Subsequent to that, that same issue would be identified in the report to the town meeting. And to Ted's point about adding it to the website, it would be another way of making it known to the town. So it's sort of a progression through initially meeting with the individual department that has been audited all the way up through the Board of Selectmen to the town meeting.
Okay.
Darnell?
Rick, question. In your vision of what the audit committee would be responsible for and do, we find deficiencies along the way reported by the auditors who come in, we hire to come and do the audit. What tracking mechanisms do you foresee or have that will basically say, okay, we saw this problem, this is what we did about it, how's that getting reported back? Is that part of that management letter, or how would you track this over time, and how do you envision that happening?
Yes, that is part of the management letter. If you were to see a management letter in recent years, you would see in some cases that there are repetitive items in that
And
management.
that's exactly what I'm referring to, these things that constantly stay there year after year after year, how those.
And so those items do appear in the management letter, and the auditors specifically say this is a first-time item, or they'll say we've cited this in the past. So they do report that. And, that's, the public currently hears that once a year at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, if they happen to tune in at the right minute. In the future, again, going to town meeting and reporting on the town management letter, you would have a situation in town meeting where the department, whichever agency is responsible, would have to say, yep, it's been on there last year and this year because A, I don't believe it's a correct thing to do, or B, we don't have enough manpower, or whatever the answer is, whatever the explanation is. But it will show up in the management letter and potentially be reported annually at the town meeting until it's resolved.
Well, okay. So you're saying the audit committee once these problems are identified, are gonna go to those individual department heads or departments and discuss these issues with them, or try to figure out a strategy for alleviating these issues, or what, that's what I'm at, what is, you actually give power to this committee to make certain decisions. What are you doing, what are you envisioning the committee doing to help alleviate some of these issues that, persist throughout
I do see the committee meeting with the department heads that have identified internal control issues. And if I were a department head with an internal control issue, the goal is either to have the audit to understand why it should not be an internal control issue, or I gotta fix it. And the audit committee's responsibility should be to go out and say, are you in the process of fixing it? What's your status? So I do see the audit committee with the threat of saying, hey, we do an annual report. If it isn't fixed, it's showing up again, and we're reporting that in the annual town meeting.
Okay, so Rick, in the last 2 or 3 years that I've been on the Warrant Committee, I've read a couple of the management letters, and as far as I can tell, some of the problems the town has are, there are constraints of technology, and in order to solve some of the deficiencies reported in the current management letters, we have to go out and spend a lot of money. So that's one aspect of life, unfortunately. I think a lot of the a lot of the issues that surface from an audit like this, some of them are, the internal cash controls, and then some are, reporting issues. As far as I can tell, I think the town accountant is doing a great job with regularizing some of the reporting issues. We've been getting much better support for the work we do here. And I know that isn't, the whole ball of wax, but it has been really gratifying. So I wouldn't be worried if I was a department head about any of, having this on the web or anything like that. What I am a little bit concerned with, though, is how would you characterize the comprehensive of our current scope of audit services? I think it's pretty wide, pretty robust, because I would hate to see the bill go up 100% for audits, for the audit, because it's already at, $52,000 a year, which may or not be a lot, but for a $100 million outfit, but we are giving the audit committee, we're telling them to develop the scope of audit services. Is there any restraint on the scope of audit services that they, how do you see that, working out?
The appropriation.
Well, there isn't. That's John's point is the appropriation, but also you have the scope of services in part is defined by the state and federal laws. So when you look at what GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, requires, and that provides a good background for what the committee's scope should begin with. In terms of, what we have not said and what's not in this article, we're not asking this audit committee to be an investigative committee. So that's beyond the scope of what's being authorized in this article. And that's the type of bill you would run up if you just started sending people willy-nilly all over the place doing that type of audits. So the scope is partly defined by the federal government and the receipt of federal funds here and the receipt of state funds. And the Department of Revenue has some excellent guidelines in terms of what should be followed. So even if you were in private practice as an audit partner, you could come in and look at the Department of Revenue guidelines and look at the Department of Revenue book, and then also look at the Government Accounting Standards Board, which, by the way, Massachusetts government doesn't completely follow. But you could look at that and develop a scope, and I think, in fairness to your point, the audit committee probably needs to be sensitized that you can't just go out and ask for the moon. Any good audit committee in a firm is not looking to spend the most money. So whether it's an audit committee here or an audit committee in a firm, they're not looking to spend the most money. They're looking to get a well-done audit for what's, the right amount of money.
Great. Maybe we can even lower that bill.
You may be able, as Steve talked about, in terms of the procurement.
Super. Does anybody have any further questions on this article? John?
Just one comment, the auditing started in 1975, and you say that the 2 or 3 updates by bylaw. There's a bylaw committee right now, has been, but then the town adopted a sunset bylaw, which retired committees that were not renewed. And that has happened to this committee and to the IT committee, so those committees don't even exist now. So I didn't want you to think that there's a fallback. No, there's no committee right now.
Right, okay, thank you. So this would establish the committee permanently by bylaw.
And the sunset doesn't apply to bylaw committees.
Right. So, if nobody has any other questions about this article, we could, I would listen to a motion to recommend it. Phil, sorry.
I move that we accept Article 7 to establish a permanent bylaw audit committee.
Second.
Okay, we have a recommendation on the screen.
You need it to say as written.
So it could say as written, but it
As written.
says recommended that the town vote to amend the general bylaws of the town, et cetera, et cetera. Includes the body of the article. So
I'll
as
second Phil's
as written.
motion as written.
Great. And any further questions on this? No? All in favor? Super, thank you.
Thank you.
One down, Rick.
We're down, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, the next one is, actually it's alluded to that at the beginning, and that is the article regarding the quorum. And again, that went into the context of the Department of Revenue report. It was pages 10 and 11, I believe, was number 3 in their recommendations, but they never actually recommended this. This is something internally that we came up with. And the thought process here is this deals with committees that are appointed, not elected. So this is, you know, at one time the article had a draft in it that had elected. There is procedures in place, there's a process in place for the elected positions. So this is dealing with committees that are appointed, and it deals with the purposes, for example, if you took our own committee, for example, at one point we only had 7 members out of the 9. So in that example, this would say in our committee, if we only had 7 out of the 9 filled, 4 would be the quorum, 4 out of the 7. Currently, we have 9 full members, so the quorum is the 5. In this committee, the warrant committee, for example, currently with 15 members, that are the official number, your quorum is 8. But if you had 13 filled, if this article would be approved, your quorum would be 7. So this provides an opportunity, and this was, as I say, ironically intended to address the issue that the Department of Revenue was saying, okay, there were some vacancies in the warrant committee. Well, you know, the issue is any committee in town has a potential at any given time for have vacancies that exist, and this just makes for a more effective operation of government. And so we asked town council to draft this language. This is, again, after his review, so, and we, again, modified this.
Steve?
I wonder if there should be an adjective, a simple majority of the members presently or currently or actively or something. When I read this, I couldn't tell that there was a difference between the number of people that were supposed to be on the committee and the number of people that were appointed to the committee at the current time. So just by you explaining that to me, now I get it, but I didn't get it by reading it. And
So which line are you on right now, if I look at this?
the 1, 2, 3, the quorum of a public body is a simple majority of the members of that. Then the next line, the quorum shall be a simple majority of the members serving on that public body rather than a simple majority of the number of members of that body. So the majority of members currently, presently, actively, something like that, that would be a little more descriptive. Like I said, I mean, I read a fair amount of bylaws and things, and I couldn't tell, so it could be a little, maybe not, maybe it's just me.
So you have, I think you have a valid point, Steve. I'm not sure what the solution is, but it is a little, it's,
This is really, it's sort of the legal language that was drafted. I mean, I can certainly go back to town council and ask them, but, so you're in the fourth line, you would add the word appointed?
Members actively serving, or I don't know, presently serving, something that says that, you know, it refers to the current state,
The current state.
yeah.
So, Steve, you just want between members and serving, the word
Yeah,
currently?
or, you know, I'm not gonna try and wordsmith, and I'm just saying that it's hard for me, by looking at that, to tell
Exactly what
the
it's.
distinction.
Right.
Yeah, that's all.
Maybe appointed.
So let me talk to town council, just, and, I can, you know, the suggestion,
Yeah,
Is-
the explanation made sense, it was just the reading didn't, so that's sometimes the problem.
so the quorum shall be a simple majority of the members serving in that public body rather than a simple majority of the number of members of that public body as constituted.
I think the problem is with the word constituted.
Constituted is the number
Because-
authorized by the legislation or authorized by the bylaw.
Right, well, constituted, I mean, are you as currently constituted, is, or as intended to be constituted? You know, I think that's the word that becomes ambiguous and leads to the,
Yeah, I think you need to make a distinction between the number that are authorized to be appointed and the number that have been appointed. That's the distinction you want to make.
He meant by constituted was authorized.
Yeah, but I
Right.
don't think it's clear enough.
And I think maybe it should be appointed members, at the simple majority of the appointed members.
Here's what I'll do, let me talk to town council offline, and we'll get a clarification between now and Monday, when we come back.
that'd be great. I don't, as long as it might read a little more clearly, that would be the goal.
Okay.
And I think the word appointed is key. Darnell?
And on these committees, the appointed committees, are there should be mandatory minimums? Because if you have one committee, you end up only finding, and I'm gonna use our committee, because I don't think it'll happen, but you only find, 7 people. That's not enough to do the load. And they say just a majority of that, it should be something that mandatory minimums of a certain given amount. Because when you say, now my question, when you say it should be 15 people on the warrant committee, 11 people can do the job, 7 people probably can't. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if that's, would be handled in this or discussed in this here, because of the way we're talking about majority of appointed bodies. I don't know if that should be handled here or if it's handled somewhere else, but.
Maybe a different
I'm
article,
questioning.
maybe a different
I'm
article.
questioning, because
Well,
when
it
we
is,
go to make the change, you kind of like say, okay, if we only find, so that's what I'm questioning.
Yeah, I think-
And I'm not sure if it's this article we need, or if there's something else that we need to address that.
I think it would be something else. I mean, I think I see this in terms of operating within the existing committee. If you're talking about minimum for any
Yeah.
committee in the
But that's
town.
what but this article here addresses the changing of what represents a quorum. So if we say what represents a quorum of a committee is, for warrant committee, is eight people. Now we're saying if we have 11, what represents the quorum of that 11 is now 6. I'm just bringing it to the extreme, because now what we're doing, we're changing the spirit of why we wanted to have the quorum in the first place. So that, you have bodies and enough people represented there to vote, not just a smaller unit. So we're authorizing a smaller unit to make decisions on town matters. And sometimes, like I say, we do need this, we do need an article similar to this. I just want to flush it out a little more and get some questions asked, and what you might have been thinking when you were putting this together. Because that's,
Well, we actually had thought, I mean, what the recommendation of the Department of Revenue was, in fact, to reduce the scope or size of the committee and make it, I think it had some cases 7 or 9. We didn't think that made sense, and so, but that would be a separate article. It would say, okay, the committee would be sized at 7, 9, or 11, whatever number you choose. We're not going in that direction.
Darnell, are you concerned that if this article passes, that takes the pressure off the moderator to appoint this committee fully?
Well, not just this committee, I'm
or
talking
any
about,
other
any other
So-
committee too. I just
Yeah.
use the warrant committee because I figure I'll shine a light on us for the minute, but we have other committees that,
Right.
have minimums of 5. What if we only find 3? Now we have basically 2 people as a mandatory, a quorum, deciding on something that we're expecting 5 people to make that decision. So these are the things that, what I'm saying, when we change this here, we're actually opening that up. Now, we're a large committee here, but I'm saying we have other committees around town which are a lot smaller. And so when you start saying, okay, 3 people is now that committee, 2 people are now making decisions for it, that whole committee. So that's why I'm saying, are we running into a problem here by just adopting this as it sits? That's my
I don't think
question.
we are. I mean, we could look at, our committee could look at the separate issue if we thought there was insufficient volunteers to serve on various town committees. We haven't really run across that yet at this point. I mean, I know the moderator and the selectmen do a great job
They
of
do a great job of trying
reaching
to
out.
get people out there. And like I said, this here I think will address more of the larger committees in town. We have, over 10 people or something, or over 9 people. But when you start shining this light on the smaller committees, that's where I think this here article might, have its problems. And, figuring a meeting of that standard, because, you have 11 people, 6, that's great. That's still a good number, a good representation. You have 5, now you're missing 1 or 2 people, not being found, not being able to appoint it. Now you have 2 people doing that, and that really limits the ability to get the true feeling. So that's what my question is. That's what I'm asking, because of the way this is written right now, the way it stands, because we're changing the quorum on it. So if you have 5 people, you still want to have a minimum quorum of 3 people making those decisions.
Yeah, I don't see this article being amended to address that, because that's sort of a different issue.
Well, we are, in the abstract we are, because once we say the quorum is the amount of people found, I'm going to point it at the time. You find your first 3, they go into session, they work, now they're making decision, or able to vote and put things in law by 2. You may find your 4th and 5th person later on, maybe not, but you're already limited the number of people needed to make changes or make recommendations for changes. And that's what this is talking about, because you're changing what the quorum number is. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what I'm asking. Is it just here we need to do it somewhere else? But to put this in place, you automatically make that
Well, sure.
circumstance. You put that circumstance into place.
What might be good for a large committee might have
Real
an unhappy effect or unintended effect on a
small
small committee.
Right.
That's, that would be too bad, but then again, maybe most of the committees that are doing things of great substance aren't down to 3 appointments. That would be too bad.
Well, what I'm saying, it's just like, that's what we're putting into place. When you're putting something into bylaw, you put something, now you're like, this is what it is. It's not just, we'll try it for a year or 2, so that's the question. And I'm asking this to put on the table because I'm sure, hopefully y'all had these discussions and you say, hey, and you can enlighten us on some discussions around this matter y'all may have had. I don't know, I wasn't there. So I just want to see if this was brought up or even spoke about or
Yeah.
recognized.
That's sort of a different angle. I mean, remember, the math gets pretty tight when you get to a small number of people. So if you
Yeah,
have
and
a
that-
5
no, that's what I'm saying. So on
so
a
the
big
quorum,
committee,
so let's say a quorum on a 5-member committee,
it's 3.
3, but on a 4-member committee, it's still 3.
It's 3. And so it's
So, I
like,
mean, so in this case here, this article
but
doesn't
when it
help
goes,
that. This doesn't help that.
yeah, but I'm saying, but if you only have a 5-member committee, supposing you have a 5-member committee, you only have 3 members appointed. You're in search of maybe your other 2. That committee goes into session and start making decisions and voting recommendations. It's still
Their
only
quorum is
takes
now
2.
2.
It
Right.
doesn't take 3. You see what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. So if you have a larger committee and you lose some people, that might not be as big a deal. But when you have a very small committee or small committees, Now you're talking about two people making decisions or whatever for a situation. That's what I'm just asking, is like,
No, I think I've answered that, and that is,
I know.
it's the appointing authority's responsibility, in this case, the moderator of the Board of Selectmen, to fill that committee, when you get down to it.
yeah, but now we're saying like, we're taking some.
I think I'd like to be on one of those two-people committees.
Yeah, you know, and I'm saying, but what
Get
you're
that work
doing is,
done. So,
you don't, by not having the recommended amount of personnel on a committee, you're not taking away the ability for that committee to make decisions, and that's an issue.
We're dealing with the DOR recommendation of 7 to a warrant committee, which would mean a quorum of 4. So we're a long way away from that.
Yeah, well, no, it's not just the warrant committee here, it's gonna be committees across town. So it's not just the warrant committee, that's what I'm saying.
I'm just saying Conservation Commission, Historic Commission, there are a number of committees, but they're not, they stay pretty well full. Occasionally they're down 1 or 2, but I don't think bottoming out, which you're concerned about, and I think it's a good concern. I think it's unlikely to be a problem. This does bring pressure on the moderator and on the Board of Selectmen to keep these committees up to snuff, and I think that's a good thing.
Lee, Michael, did you have a
I had very
point?
similar comments to the ones
Okay.
just voiced, that I believe that this is a safeguard so that a committee can continue to do work, for instance, if they happen to lose committees towards the end of their term. But that I think the pressure to maintain full slates is still going to be there. This doesn't excuse that.
I think this helps out most in the summertime, when committees are new, people are on vacation, and, you know, maybe the roster hasn't been fully appointed. You can barely get any business done in the middle of July or August. If you have a quorum of 8 on the warrant committee and 11 people are appointed and 4 people are on vacation, you know, you got a problem. So I think this can be very helpful. So we'll get a small word change and
Yeah, I'll talk to the town council next.
and zip it through, I hope. Great. So let's move on to,
The next one was the bylaw review
Next one.
committee, which was number 8, I believe on page 14. And the thought process here is, again, we're in agreement with the Department of Revenue here. Those of you who had a chance to look at the bylaws that we have, I think would agree that needs a codification. There's some of the bylaws have, I think the zoning bylaws were revised in recent years, and we've excluded that. But the intent here is to have, there is some citizens, to have citizens of a number of 5 of them to review the existing bylaws and to make recommendations to the town meeting regarding additions, deletions, and changes, and just really trying to improve the bylaws so they get up to speed and get current.
I think that's an admirable goal. Says Steve.
Rick, I can't imagine that there wouldn't at least be one attorney invited, but was there any discussion of having at least one attorney involved on this? And if so, it's not in here now, so
We did think of that, I mean, we didn't, I don't think we ended up actually particularly amending the article, right, so. I mean, it's something that it would make sense to, that I would think the majority of the committee would probably be attorneys.
who else would want to do it?
Touche.
We did look at what other towns have done, and many towns have had this type of study. And some of them sought an appropriation when they set the committee up to hire a specialized bylaw consultant. And the County Government Study Committee is not seeking a recommendation for money for an appropriation, but they think that this committee may, well, as they study the scope of their assignment, may be back at a fall or other town meeting seeking an appropriation. That's very common, done. There are Massachusetts towns seek consultants on this kind of a number of them.
So my question is related to this. They're reviewing the existing general bylaws. what access do I or anybody else have to the general bylaws, up-to-date general bylaws? The ones on the website now are up-to-date through 2007.
I don't know when the last time they were published. I mean, they used to be. I have an old book at home that's probably 20 years old.
I think on the town website, it's up to 2007. If you talk to Susan Galvin, she'll give you the one since then.
Okay. Chuck, I have a seat for you right here.
Thank you.
At any rate, well, it would be nice to be able to publish the amended and up-to-date bylaws of the town, whether, you know, the zoning bylaws as well, on the website, because sometimes I'm asked, you know, I'm trying to look at the current law and it's not actually there. So I think there's a process that we're missing the boat somewhere in that process, getting the law onto the website. I know that's not part of the scope of this article, but I don't know how the committee members are going to do it unless they get a bound copy of.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult assignment, even going through it all.
Right.
If there are little technology assistance required to do what you want.
But I think it's a great idea. Any other thoughts? We're discussing the formation of a bylaw review committee to bring us up to date. Lee Michael?
Would you mind readdressing why some of the bylaws are excluded again? I know you just referenced it.
Well, the zoning bylaw was more recently amended, and I think, Peter, we talked about the personnel administration law. You looked into some of these.
I think the thought was that the four things that we accept, the personnel bylaw, the stormwater management, the wetlands bylaw, and the zoning bylaw, that they were kind of specialized topics. They're quite extensive. And there's some other group that, you know, either the planning board, the personnel committee, you know, the DPW and Conservation Commission kind of supervise those other bylaws. So the thought was that they really require some expertise rather than just kind of general government.
There's no index currently.
Right.
Which is a problem.
Right, it is a problem. The, Lee Michael, last spring, was it? The zoning bylaw was revamped with an index and a totally different organizational structure. So we haven't seen it, but the idea is that this will happen. And so that, you know, so they're making progress on that.
Right.
On that side.
My initial thought was just that if you were setting up a committee, I do respect the point that there are existing boards, in some cases elected boards, that oversee these areas. I was just questioning the wisdom of limiting the scope of making recommendations, because it's not like we would be empowering people to make changes. We would be empowering them to review and make recommendations, and I think it's conceivable that, especially in the zoning bylaw, that there are areas that still need to be addressed. So I don't particularly agree with the need to limit.
It's just the complexity. I mean, when you look at some of the zoning bylaw, the complexity of that would really distract this committee to focus on the zoning versus focusing on the other ones. So just, as Peter pointed out, the specialized nature of it, if you look at that, it just seemed to focus at least on the ones. I mean, there's a whole series of other ones they could focus on.
Mm-hmm.
We just think time is better spent on those rather than trying to navigate through some of these other ones.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about this is that it's forming a committee, it's giving them a job, and then it says basically get it done in 3 years and you're done, and your committee is dissolved. So it's a more of a narrow focus rather than an open-ended and job with no deadline. So I think I think the people on this committee will clean up that section of the bylaw, and maybe we'll have to appoint another committee to clean up the zoning bylaw. So anyway, I like the fact that it doesn't go on for decades, so.
But I think Lee Michael's correct, because once they get into adopting a new formatting system, it should apply to these other bylaw sections, but I think that's something we'll have to catch up with later. But if you look at other towns that have gone through this, you'll see that everything is in the same format, and that won't be a product of this thing.
Right.
Well, any other questions on the bylaw reviews, this article? No. I have a recommendation on the screen. Anybody wants to make a motion? It's Article 43. Paul?
I'll make a motion that the warrant committee vote on Article 43 as written and recommending that it pass.
Second.
All in favor? Grand.
Great, thank you.
2 out of 3. Okay.
Can I ask
Well-
why are we not doing number 15? Maybe I missed something.
You may. It's not ready for prime time yet.
Okay,
The recommendation is much more involved than the article itself.
okay.
And that, it's being formulated by the Town
Being
Government
fine-tuned.
Study Committee with some involvement of the selectmen, or consultation, and it's getting vetted along the way by town council, and eventually there will be a draft recommendation for us to look at, and then we can go to work on that.
And it's for this
Okay.
spring's town meeting?
It would be, I think the plan would be Monday night, to be
Okay.
here Monday night.
Next
to-
Monday.
Randy, we're down to about one sentence.
Okay.
Trying to work out.
Right.
Close.
Hope it's
Right.
only one sentence.
And then we get our turn to kick it around, so. So anyway, that's why we're not looking at Article 15 tonight. So, the next one you might want to look at is,
This one is the article on the other post-employment benefits liability trust,
great,
and that's cited on.
it's Article
page-
36.
That was originally reported by the Department of Revenue in the report on page 20. And it points out the accrued liability actuarially is 107 million. So that this is something I know the Warrant Committee in the past has been supportive of. And what we're looking here is that we're recommending in this that obviously that a separate trust fund be established for the purposes of getting this funded, and that you consider transferring over the balances from the stabilization fund for this purpose. So it's a long way to go in terms of achieving the liability. So there's some good examples. Those of you that have a chance to go on the Department of Revenue website, the town of Needham has done a great job of trying to address this. So there's a good article on that website in terms of what they did, in terms of setting aside funds and then investing the funds as it did with its pension funds. So this is a liability that we think needs to be addressed, on an ongoing basis. And I know the Warrant Committee in the past has been supportive of that, so we think it's, when the town, the data we had at the time was the town only had 134,000 set aside, so that's something obviously we need to keep working on, putting aside funds, because we've done a good job on the pension side, but these health insurance and other benefits are continuing to accrue, and we've been paying them on an as-you-go basis.
Okay, my guess is, and I should have checked with Amy maybe, but my guess is that there's probably more like about 300,000 in there right now. And I don't know, I'd always thought that we needed to achieve a certain,
It was 500,000 was the minimum for getting into the state, and I think the question would be to transfer if you transfer the balances over and add money this year, then you potentially would be eligible to get into that state plan and have their investment done similar to the pension plan.
right, but you need 500.
That's
that-
our
is
stand,
that
I would
the
say,
re-
yes.
Okay. Well, I think we're pretty close, and we have in our budget about 143,000 proposed for this fund this year, or rather fiscal year 16. So I'm not sure exactly what that brings the total up to, but it's pretty close. Would this article look to appropriate that amount, or to transfer the entire amount from the stabilization fund we're putting it in now?
We'll transfer the entire amount from the stabilization fund. Right.
So we need to vote the stabilization fund before we would vote a contribution to the stabilization fund before we voted this transfer.
All right, but then you would potentially need a 2/3 vote, right, to get it out of the stabilization fund into this particular fund, right?
Sure, well, and to put it in, too.
Right.
But in terms of order, we would want.
I think that would make sense, right?
Right, okay, I need to check on that. Anyway, I think there are some questions popping up here, so Darnell.
Right. $500,000 minimum to set the investment. Can you give us some information on the operations of this liability benefit fund?
Well, if you,
Information about it?
yeah, if you were able to hit that 500,000 and potentially join into the state fund, there's a core fund, it's the PRIT fund, and when you do your review of the pension fund, the state, we joined that, as Kevin alluded to, that committee I headed up 30 years ago. And we had probably about the same amount of money at that time in pension funds. So we then, back some 25 years, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, joined the PRIT fund. I think, Kevin, does that sound right? About 25 years ago we moved in?
All right, yeah.
So we moved into the PRIT fund, and that is a really sort of a balanced approach where it has a combination of stocks, bonds, and they've gone into all, various allocations into all sorts of funds. In this report here on the Department of Revenue website, Needham joined around the same time period we did. And the report in here, let me just give you reports that the PRIT fund had an average annual return of more than 9.6 since its inception in 1985. Now, there are years, as in any cases, where it's up and it's down. So obviously, in recent years, there's been ups and there's been downs. But the PRIT fund would be a case where it provides for the investment to be done with other municipalities and with the state other funds. So it's sort of it's a documented separate purpose, and I could have this article, which is again off the Department of Revenue website on the Needham experience. I can make copies and ship it out to you. Ship it out to the committee.
Committee, but also,
Yeah.
I do a lot of questions also so the town understands as they view this, some of the things that are going on and why we might want to change our current situation into a new situation, why we might want to take that risk. Because we are vastly underfunded.
Well, the
in
first
these
goal here
areas,
is-
and we gotta get,
The first goal is certainly to save. I mean, the goal is to start saving, putting money away. What you're going to read here, or what Needham eventually did, was to meet the annual requirement. So it actually, what's interesting, when you get to the annual requirement, on an ongoing basis, similar to the pension side, you suddenly actuarially can go from using the discount rate, you're allowed to use a different discount rate. And so when you change your discount rate, the government allows you to change the liability. So the liability changed quite a bit once you went on to an ongoing plan. So the Government Accounting Standards Board hasn't mandated a date yet to be compliant. So that's why the municipalities in Massachusetts have not complied, because there is no finite date. But certainly in terms of the liability and the discount, one of the reasons to consider this is to reduce what the town's liability is that it goes out and uses, for example, bonding.
The DOR reported that the most recent liability calculation was $107 million. $107 million. We're just nibbling.
Right, no, correct. We should probably get a spreadsheet up here, but basically, this this liability is being addressed in a minute way currently. It is a large liability. The thought, as outlined in the financial management review, is that we would do the best we can, but when our current catch-up on pensions is over in about 2025, I think, 28,
2020, yeah.
that we could then put a much larger amount of money annually into the GASB situation, and then the OPEB situation, sorry, and we'd be able to bring it even about 2043, I think. But this would get us there faster, having the trust fund, and that's the reason to do it. So anyway, Michael.
If we change the discount rate, what would that effect be on that $107 million? Would it
Well, let me just,
give
let's
me a
see.
nice low number?
All right, so let me give you an example. So this is the report on Needham. To really quote, to illustrate the importance of this discount investment rate in these actuarial calculations, Needham's unfunded actuarial accrued liability as of July 1st, 2007 was $76.4 million, using a 4% discount rate, and it dropped to $43.6 million when they used the higher rate, which was permitted because they had gone into the full funding of the annual requirement.
So something like 4/7 of the $107 million?
Yeah,
If you
that's
do
about right.
mental math here.
Yep. That's,
Just for the studio audience, a nice big number to hear.
Tom.
Just point of clarification. Rick is absolutely right. You're using a 4% discount rate if you're not funding. You're using about a 9% discount rate when you are funding. But that 9% discount rate only applies to what is funded. So when you only have a small portion funded, you're not really going to bring it down all that much. If you're fully funded, then you would see a dramatic drop in the liability. But the other thing too, when you have a stabilization fund, the liability still stays on your books even though you have a stabilization fund. When you fund, that liability actually leaves your books to the extent you fund it. So there's a difference. Even though money's set aside either way, funding it with it through an irrevocable trust, which is what you'd be doing, removes the liability from your books.
To the extent that it's funded.
To the extent it's funded.
The recognition might help you with rating agencies.
definitely, if you're taking action, it would help with the rating agencies in terms of addressing this problem.
So let me ask you, in order to vote a recommendation on this, you think we ought to be transferring as much as we can out of the stabilization fund into the trust?
You're putting the funds in one place.
So therefore, we need a specific dollar number in order to vote this recommendation.
You have to get that from Amy, and
Yes.
Amy's in discussions with her, she said 300-something.
Well, that's what I think, yes.
She said that this proposal is supported by the actuary.
So the article itself is drafted to see what sum of money the town will vote, and the answer to the recommendation, you're correct, would contain whatever the
Right.
number is of the town.
So if we don't have that number right now, we can't vote this recommendation.
Well, you can
right
vote
now.
you can,
So, I did check the index. The article for the funding the stabilization fund comes just before this. So we could certainly appropriate the money to the stabilization fund and then move the entire thing over. Tom?
One final point too. If you're gonna fund, typically what you'd want to do, because if you're making a pay-as-you-go payment, that's not part of the stabilization fund, there's a pretty significant number every year. That pay-as-you-go can be funded at the beginning of the year into the trust fund, and then the retirees are paid out of the trust fund. Even though it's an in and an out, it does help bring that liability down because there's that much more at the beginning of the year in that trust fund that you'd be discounting at a different rate. So, and that would probably push you up to the $500,000 when you make the deposit. I don't know what our current pay-as-you-go retiree health benefit, but I'm sure it's a fairly significant number.
I think, if you include the teachers, that comes in the assessment from the teachers, that's a significant number.
The retired teachers, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Tom? Tom, Can you, for my benefit, maybe somebody else, can you explain that a little more tightly? So in other words, there's a source of funds that can go to the trust that is not from the general fund or the stabilization
Through
fund?
the general fund, every year, we pay retiree health insurance. We're doing it, you know, it just goes in. So, and we're also paying retired teachers through the cherry sheet. And that's part of that unfunded liability as well. So a combination of the two of those, if you funded that money into the trust, then it just goes, you know, rather than paying it out of the general fund, you're paying it out of the trust. It's the same number either way, but it's making you deposit into the trust that much larger, that's all. So if you're worried about 500,000, you'd be well over the 500,000.
So for instance, you're talking about splitting out a piece of the assessment from the state?
Yes, and
and
group insurance.
and a piece of the group insurance.
Correct.
Well, that sounds great, but that would have to be appropriated by town meeting to that.
Well, it's already appropriate, so it's just a matter of where you transfer the funds to.
Okay, but we have to identify by the 24th, when the warrant goes to print, what that number is, and that we're funneling straight to the to this new trust. Would that be right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because
it sounds like a great idea, but it has to be actionable. There has to be a number for us to use in order to do anything with it.
Well, do you want some help drafting a recommendation to these CPAs?
Well, for instance, when we're appropriating money for group insurance, we're not going to appropriate all of it to the group insurance account if we're trying to put some of it straight into this new trust. So I need a dollar figure split between, similarly, I would need a dollar figure split between what we're funding to pay the state assessment. If we're not just paying it,
Sure.
we
And
need a split.
Certainly, you know what that number is. You know,
Oh,
you have a pretty good idea what retiree health insurance is going to be next year. I don't personally, but somebody does.
All right, so we need some numbers in terms of.
So I mean, this sounds like a great way to maybe get up to the 500, because I think we might be a little short. If we have about 300 in there now, and we're proposing 150 or 140 or thereabouts, that, you know, we're a little short there. So I think we need some numbers before we can vote a recommendation.
Why don't we bring this back Monday night as well? It gives us a few days here to get the right numbers on that piece, as well as the number on the transfer from the stabilization fund. That's the other number you need.
Right. Lee Michael. And then there were some other questions too, Steve, too. Lee Michael?
The article references a Massachusetts general law that dictates the creation of this trust fund. Does that general law give the town the ability to invest the money in the way that you were describing earlier? Or is that a separate authorization from town meeting that is required in order to say how you can invest the money?
I don't know the answer to the top of my head. I'll check that out for you.
Okay.
Steve?
Rick, whose care will this trust fund be under? The Board of Selectmen or the Retirement Board or the Treasurer? And ought the article say so?
Well, let's see. Let me check with town council on that.
So the proposed trust fund does not have a requirement for contribution, a fixed amount every year, does it? It wouldn't be set up that way, right?
No.
No. So you could put in 1, 2, 3, 400, whatever you wanted to do.
That's correct. I mean, I know the committee in the past was talking about 1/6 of 1%, 1/6 of 1%.
Yes.
It was a policy, I think, but not a legal requirement.
Right. I mean, it was a guideline.
Right.
And we're using that this year to formulate the contribution. So,
Ted, one
Okay.
question for you.
Steve?
If we're going to put part of the retiree health care into this, would we not have to move this up in the sequence so that this account is set up before we vote? General insurance, or?
Yes, we would. Yeah, we'd have to move. We'd have to move that.
We
Now,
have to
paying,
establish it.
paying the, I mean, the state assessment is a non-appropriated expense, so there's no article there to worry about that split, but it would be nice to know what that split was, because that's what gets you to the $500,000
If you're gonna vote to fund, yeah, you should
requirement.
need a number, yeah.
But yes, for the group insurance, if we're going to split that up, we certainly need to vote these other articles before group insurance. So, yeah, depending on where the numbers are, maybe this, can we set up this trust with a number less than 500,000?
You can set up, you just can't join the state fund.
So this article is useful even if we're a little short,
Yes.
So we gotta establish it.
because then it's,
Next year.
Yeah.
when it hits that mark, then it could be
Transfer.
transferred, and it could be transferred without any additional action on the part
Well, I
of the
think that's
town.
Lee's question. I need to check on Lee. Lee asked that question. Anita.
Darnell?
No, that answered the question, because what it does is it allows us to establish the fund in a vote. And then, in the secondary vote, establish its source of funding. So as long as we get it established early, then we can figure out where we're gonna acquire those fundings after.
So that it wouldn't be that as important to redirect group insurance money this year, if we were just setting it up.
If you're just going to set it up and not fund it, but otherwise, there's going to be an expense involved in setting up, you are going to need some funding mechanism, and there is a lot of fiduciary responsibility, the same way the retirement board has fiduciary responsibility. I certainly wouldn't want to be responsible for investing those funds myself, so you're going to need some vehicle to invest them.
You certainly could set it up the first year, though. You could set
You could set it up, yeah.
You could set it up and you can fund it based upon,
Put it in a savings account, I guess, yeah. Right.
there's the rest of the other investments are. I mean, 500,000 in this market is not going to earn much anyways.
Well, invested in print, it will.
It pretty well, but you don't have a material amount of money.
Right, and if you went into a regular trust and put it with a, with a brokerage house someplace, and there are brokerage houses that do this, but again, I think there's a little more risk involved, because you're the only one in that.
I think the approach to take would be a short term, because the intent is to switch it over to the state funds. So
Yeah.
your short-term investments, you're talking about is probably less than 10 basis points.
Probably.
And so if you're talking less than 10 basis points, we're not taking any kind of.
Right, but my point is, if we don't have quite 500 saved, or earmarked, or whatever you want, for qualifying it for the state service, then we at least can pass the article, have it set up for $450,000, earn a slower rate of interest, and then when we do get the money in there, great.
That's correct.
But if I need to go to print in about a week, and I'm not waiting around for a split of group insurance monies that might or might not be forthcoming. Darnell?
Right now, if you say your number with Amy was about 300,000 something, three something.
I think so. Does anybody have a warrant? Yeah, the last year's
No, I'm
warrant.
just saying rough. And you talk, we have here slated another 147, so we're actually talking maybe like 53,000 difference right now.
Right.
Maybe.
We can take it out of snow and ice. Okay.
No, I ain't taking out snow. Take some somewhere. It's 50 degrees today. No, but
The fat one?
Oh, you mean the town?
town report.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying, so
I got time.
I think we'll be safe if I do it, because why incur additional expense this year setting up this temporary parking place. Let's spend a minute and find the money.
So find the money.
Yeah, spend a minute and find the money.
Because you're so close.
Because it's 50, we have, I mean, because we're gonna, I don't know, it's gonna cost us to set up a separate brokerage and everything else
No, I need-
to deal with this.
I need the warrant. The stabilization fund article from last spring should have a balance as of about 1 year ago, and then we added 100,000 to it, so that,
Well, here's what we'll do. We'll come back Monday night with the number. We'll talk to the town accountant and finalize.
See how
what
quickly
we-
she can get the number. I mean, I think that's what you're worried
That's what
about.
we're,
Yeah.
If she can get it quickly, we should.
okay. We're at 383,986,
20,000.
okay, after last year's contribution. And add a small amount of interest, and we're proposing 143, so we're over the top.
You're over.
Okay. All right. So,
We found it.
so we found it.
That's what's in.
All right. So this is good. We can move forward. If there are refinements that benefit us in the way of putting money in there faster through group insurance, that would be great. I'd love to hear about it. But we can go ahead as we are with this, and we can get the specific number from Amy and vote this thing on Monday.
That sounds like a plan.
Great. All right. Moving on.
All right, so the last one is the Information Technology Committee. And this calls for 5 members, and this also was in the Department of Revenue report. It was item number 7, identified on pages 13 and 14. There has been a committee in the past that sort of went by the, sort of just disappeared, for lack of a better word. So this is really creating in the bylaws, really a reconstituted technology committee. And we think this is critical across the town in terms of what the town's needs are. And we described in terms of the importance in terms of developing a strategic plan and providing advice and recommendations to town boards and commissions and to assist in the evaluation. So we think this is an area where the town has not been able to keep up, and we think this is critically needed. And there are a lot of smart people in town that we think can be enlisted to support this effort and serve on the committee.
Sounds great to me. In the interim between establishment of this committee and whatever happened to the last one, I do know that various people on the town school coordinating committee managed to do a great job coming up with a recommendation for some new town-wide financial software. Are you going to rely on any of their expertise in this?
Yeah, I think they're making an
Forward.
excellent effort. I think that makes sense to take advantage of that. So this is, and that's great that that's going on. I mean, that's the kind of thing we like to see, but we think this should focus on the across the board in terms of what the town-wide plans are and involve all the town departments.
Great. So this article also included a question about seeing what sum of money the town will vote to appropriate for the purposes of this article.
This was originally drafted way, I guess, before the consultant study. And I'm not sure of the status of the study right now, the RFP.
Oh, that's right. I think the warrant committee recommended in town meeting, someone provided $50,000 for a study.
That was an item in the selectmen's budget last year.
And it was passed.
It was
the
passed and funded, yep.
The Town General Study Committee, I believe, already drafted an RFP. We went out, the single bid or so, whatever it was, wasn't satisfactory, so an award has not been made. Is that money still available? Yeah, so, but it's in the budget.
To my knowledge, John, I don't, you know.
What it might lead to is that
hold back.
it will revert to the general fund unless your recommendation appropriates it.
So this would be reappropriating the 50,000 that has not been expended. And this committee would help get that going.
Interesting. If $50,000 wasn't going to do the job, okay, I have some responses back here, but if $50,000 wasn't going to do the job, then you're looking for more than that, presumably now. So,
The committee maybe.
okay, so I'd like to hear from Katie first. Thank you.
So we were just caucusing here. The one possibility for the $50,000 would be to apply that towards the request from the Town School Consolidation Committee for the software package, which is currently in the Capital Committee's non-bonded capital recommendation for about, what, 160, Tom? 160. So it's possible that that 50 could be applied towards that, or maybe it just flows back to free cash and gets, and then there's an appropriation next year to this committee if they seek one. But that's one option that we talked about.
Mhm. Well, that certainly has a certain amount of appeal, because we know that that's a solid expense, as opposed to, let's give $50,000 to a committee and see what happens. So was there beyond any specific scope of action for this committee to take that might cost a lot of money?
Well, the issue was developing a
consultants?
strategic plan. I mean, that was the
Okay.
goal, was to guide this process and run this process and get this strategic plan going and coming up with the recommendations. So that was the intent here. Hey, Lori. Hey. So this is one of our authors of some of this IT technology committee. Your timing is great. Okay, so we're talking about the 50 grand, if you didn't hear.
I heard. So, so last year, welcome, Leroy. Last year you came before us and spoke passionately for the $50,000 IT study, which I guess the 50,000 should have been a little more in order to get that off the ground. But maybe you want to tell us about it?
Apparently, but
Okay.
I think that this committee has the potential to continue this work and actually succeed where we did not. We drafted an RFP, we went out to bid, and the number of bids and the quality of the bids that we got was not satisfactory, as I understand it. That doesn't diminish at all the need for an overall technology strategic plan, which was the thrust of the recommendation, which was the thrust of the RFP, and which we believe this committee will help to advance. So I think there's some real benefit. I don't see it as giving $50,000 to some committee and seeing what will happen. I think the charge here is quite clear, and we would hope that with the expertise of the committee, that they could in fact engage consultants where needed to generate this plan. And we've been very specific. As you can see, we've essentially replicated the terms of the RFP in this article. So I think there's a real benefit and a pressing need to ensure that there's a lot more integration across the town and the schools regarding where we're headed in terms of technology. While I think the recommendation of the Town School Consolidation Committee was very important, none of those individuals have any information technology expertise. I think they identified a problem, and the software will solve that problem, which is let's replace some software that's about 15 years old. That was a good recommendation. I think we should do it. And the school committee voted $160,000 for that purpose. So I think we've got that covered. I think it's important, though, to make sure that this committee has some ability to engage a consultant. So I'm advocating that we do retain those funds for that purpose.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of interlocutors here, Steve and then Darnell. But you mentioned the school committee voted the $160,000. You mean
Right.
the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, or
Yeah.
or both?
No, the schools voted that to fund $160,000 of that request for year one. So that's the first phase of that plan, and I think it includes three modules of the 5.
Okay, so that's the same $160,000 that's on the Capital Improvement
Correct.
Planning Committee request?
Correct.
Thank you. Steve?
So it's pretty easy to predict that this committee is gonna say that our IT's not well enough integrated, it's too old, and it's not well enough funded. So I hope that this group will look at the business model we've established with consolidated facilities, where there's different little bits of money have been pecked off of budgets and put into one place. And it requires, leadership, so they're gonna have to find somebody that will be in charge of this. But we've already had this successful model, and it's worked because we've provided more funding, and because the affected departments have ceded a little bit of their responsibility and a little bit of their cash into that office. And rather than reinventing the wheel, I think that's given us good return, and I think that's something that they ought to look at hard.
Couldn't agree more.
We do have an information technology department.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that this committee would be replacing their function in terms of helping the town. So you were
It's no joint.
suggesting that the model in place was consolidated facilities.
Correct.
I don't,
We don't have one IT that serves the whole town. We have, an underfunded IT that serves part of it. The schools have their own. But, so many of the different programs come in and say that we need this or we need that piece of equipment or this software. And a larger oversight that just says, here's all the money we have, let's make some decisions on where we're going to invest this, and then go from there. But the money is always the thing,
right,
obviously,
right.
so.
But I think the IT department could play a
Sure.
significant role, especially, perhaps maybe under the guidance of this committee.
Yep.
Or in collaboration with that committee. Darnell?
As an IT guy and someone who does this stuff, is the purchase or the going out for this software, identifying this software, putting the cart before the horse? And I ask that question because you're asking for a study to be done across the entire.
Are we talking about the
No. I'm asking about
software, the financial software?
Yeah,
that
that's
is-
going on, because if you're asking consultants to come in and say, take a look at the whole town, see what we need, see what's going on, and I'm not sure because I was a part of that, see what's going on in the town, and then make recommendations to tie the whole town in. Are we kind of putting the cart before the horse and looking at a certain piece of software right now and say, okay, we're going to spend 160, whatever it is, $1,000 on that software?
It's phase one.
It's still $160,000. 1, 2, 3, it don't matter. But, and then asking the committee to come in and retrofit their suggestions around that purchase, because we're not going to just not use it if we order it and purchase it. Or should we basically establish this committee, which I think we definitely need for a long time, put a strategic plan together, and then look at, yes, this is either the package we need, or maybe there's a better package out there. I don't know. I'm asking a question because if you're going to bring a consultant in and ask them about, and say, okay, we're going to use this software, we bought it yesterday, you cut the legs out from underneath them. So, I don't know. Somebody can help me out with that. People who've been working with this.
I can help, and Anne Marie can give me support.
Okay.
I think that's a fair question. I think, though, the answer is no. Is it putting the cart before the horse? The reason is that I think that the Town School Consolidation Committee did do some due diligence regarding what the needs were in that particular area. But more importantly, what we heard from the current vendor is that their system in 3 years will not be usable at all. So we had to make a decision, and it was a time-sensitive decision. So in that regard, I think we made the right decision and we're moving forward, and I think this software that we're purchasing will do the job that we need it to do. But I don't think that constrains the consultant in any significant way at all, or the committee, because if you look at the scope that we're requesting from the committee, it's much broader. And going back to Steve's point, while we do have two and arguably three different information technology departments within town, those being the town IT department, the school's IT department, and the library IT, somebody's making those decisions over there. I think that has to have more coordination. It has to have more horizontal and vertical integration. So I think that there's a lot of work for this committee to do. It's forward-looking. It's going to take some time. And hopefully there's work for a consultant, because I'm not sure that we can depend on these volunteers, no matter how talented they are, to do the kind of work that we're talking about here, but hopefully they can provide the leadership that we need. So I think that we're addressing this time-sensitive need in the best way we can, but I don't think that software purchase will constrain either this committee or a consultant if they engage one.
Follow up real quick?
Please.
And Roy, I do agree with that, and what you're saying, and I definitely want the folks at home to understand that there are very few programs such as this to run cities and towns. So whereas I'm asking a question for the home viewing audience as well as for here, that they understand that there are very few municipal planning programs that can handle the finances and stuff for the town. So we do understand that, and I wanted to bring that out because I think there will be a number of questions out there if we did not ask that question, and that was not addressed.
I appreciate that.
So, let me understand this. Do I have a proposal that for a committee and an initial sum to get it going in terms of hiring consultants?
And that sum is the sum that we had allocated for the RFP, fund the RFP if it was successful. And it's there. It's there until the end of the year, anyway.
Mm-hmm. And, okay, I've got Lee Michael and then Michael. Mike.
That wasn't the way that I read the article as written, so I wonder if a language change would be needed, because I thought that the way that the article read was that we were empowering that committee to later request funds from town meeting, as opposed to fund it now. That very last sentence seems to indicate that the committee will annually request a sum.
Okay, so part of it is the way that these articles get written. The language is a little arcane and probably could use an overhaul, you know.
Or perhaps I misread it. But.
Because it's always that last line that talks about the dollars attached to the vision in the rest of the paragraph. And it is separated with
It's separated by that semicolon, so the intention was for...
Let's not go into punctuation.
So that's the separation from the annual.
And anyway, so yeah, it would have been perhaps helpful for our purposes if when these articles get presented, you know, if you know what the amount of money is, put the amount of money on the article, you know, tell us up front. So this article is looking for $50,000, but the $50,000 is already floating in the system. So I'm not sure how it gets appropriated out of the selectmen's budget. But
transfer it out. We can do a transfer.
Transfer
from the other article.
And the sum of $50,000 be appropriated, and to meet said appropriation.
Right. From a prior year.
From
the prior year.
Current year.
Okay. Great. So the money's sitting there. It's theoretically under the control of the selectmen, and I don't see any of them raising their hand. Oh, I do. Great.
Ted, we think you would just treat it as an available fund, as was just said, and transfer it. But we don't have any objection to the $50,000 being transferred for this purpose rather than for the financial software, since it's already in the Capital Committee's non-bonded recommendation. Mm-hmm. The only question is it going to be sufficient? The amounts that we were when we went out for the RFP and we talked with other towns, what we were told was that you really need, you're talking 100, 125 is what's really needed. That's what other towns estimated for their cost, and were able to get multiple bids in that range. We only had one bid, and it's from our current vendor, because our amount was 50,000. So that's just a question. Is the 50, we as a Board of Selectmen don't object to the 50,000 being used for this purpose and transferred. The question is it sufficient for this committee to work with?
Find out.
I don't know, but that's what we tried last year. So let's see, I had Michael, and then Darnell again, and then Phil, and then Betty. Jeez.
My question about this was, I'm imagining 350 towns in Massachusetts, probably 30 of them about the same size as Milton, doing the same kind of stuff as Milton. And I wonder why all these towns have to spend $100,000 to solve, you hire a consultant to solve a problem. Why can't we just get Needham's report and read a couple of them and pick a way to go with IT for less than $50,000?
Every town has done things differently. I mean, you have to look at the different models. There is a town, somebody was asking about centralized, Andover, for example, did consolidate everything. And there was an article in one of the municipal, and I think, Tom, you passed that article on to me, about the town of Andover IT department they created. But every town, unfortunately, has had experiences of different governance. So the governance is different, the fragmentation is different. And these type of departments there's nothing that is similar. So you wouldn't,
You would think, randomly, someone must have done something very close to us. I don't know. Because it's hard, the $50,000 is kind of you hear it's a number we can't get somebody for, but you can't really find out what the number actually is.
You need an IT committee.
So I would be voting, I'd be in favor of just waiting and seeing what they come up with next year, rather than say, here's $50,000 now, because we don't know exactly.
Okay, I've got Darnell, and then Phil, and then Betty.
My question goes along with what Mike was basically saying. The $50,000 is to start up the committee and get them flowing on getting ideas and telling us what the actual appropriation should be to get this stuff done. Because like you said maybe 150, maybe 100, maybe 125. The folks we had give you those estimates originally, it wasn't enough. It turned out to be not enough. So if we're going to formulate this committee, give them some seed money in which to start doing their research and understanding, getting a better understanding what the town actually needs and the type of people we need to bring in to best evaluate other systems and services that we're lacking. I don't see where $50,000 wouldn't be a seed point, and then come back to us with an appropriation maybe if we look at next year or whatever with that number. Because we already have the software coming in, we have the stuff, certain things already happening. We got to get a chance to get in, meet, and figure out what's actually going on. I guess that, to me, $50,000 would be a great seed point, a start point. And then whatever it comes out to be to have, the consultant, whether it be one or a company that has a group of consultants come in and do a full study, we don't know yet because the work wasn't finished the first time. So we don't want to just keep throwing good money after, half-baked suggestions, I guess I'll put it.
No, well, we don't want to throw it away, that's for sure. Phil?
Well, obviously, I support this article. I sit on the committee that submitted it to you. But I do have some problems with the $50,000 appropriation. My understanding is that the town of Dedham put out an RFP very similar to the one that we put out, and that they ended up with a $150,000 plan. So this money is not going to get anywhere near the kind of study that we should expect this committee to give us. I don't know what $50,000 is a lot of money for seed money. And without a clear idea of how that money would be spent, I would be loath to support it at this time. This committee, if it's approved, probably won't even get fully appointed in meeting and having their first meeting for months, many months. And I think there's probably productive work that they can do in their first year to come back to the town with a plan for a full study once they've done some due diligence to figure out what the situation is here now with IT and with the various departments that are involved in it, and come back with a recommendation for an amount of money and a study that we can look at and we can approve, rather than putting $50,000 out now and assuming they're going to come back at some point with a study which will cost whatever it costs. So I think we're rushing it.
Thank you. Betty?
I had a question more to do with the makeup of the committee that you're proposing, because it's very different than the makeup of the committee for the audit committee, where you're specifically asking for certain kinds of people with certain kinds of experience who are not employed by the town of Milton or on a part of a government entity. But this particular article doesn't have any of those specifics. Just wondering what your thinking was as to why they don't have any of those restrictions in them.
Well, first of all, the intent was to get a broad representation by having, again, representation from the school department as well as the Board of Selectmen side, so it was really trying to cross and cover all areas of government. At the same time, the limitations that you saw in the audit article were really looking again, towards the independents. And this didn't have the same focus on independence. It was really hoping to have a representation and a skill set.
So someone could be appointed to this committee that is employed by the schools or employed by the town who has information technology experience?
Well, theoretically, they could be. I mean, you would hope they would be already volunteering, not volunteering, but offering their information and advice already as an employee without having to be on the committee.
Okay.
Darnell?
Along with Betty's asking, are we looking at or envisioning that maybe the school IT, head of school IT, and maybe the head of town IT be part of this here study committee, or because that's where a lot of information going to be drummed up or pulled from. So I mean, we usually have town professionals sit on a number of our boards who have intimate knowledge of the systems we're evaluating, and I'm wondering if we're envisioning having those folks sit on the committee as well to offer their expertise and their understanding of what we actually have in place.
They would be
As
sources.
in the past, it would be expected that those school and town staff people would sit in with the committee.
We met with those
And be the staff
folks.
of the committee.
So we have met with them, but they would be sources of information. They would not be one of the 5 members. They would not be one of these 5 that are identified here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Ted, can I go back to the funding? I
Sure.
think we seem to have described this as an all or nothing proposition. So either we need 150,000, or there's probably not enough for this committee to get anything useful done. I don't think those are the only choices. I think what we're trying to allow for is for this committee to buy expertise, because that's what we've determined that we need, both with the formation of this committee and with the engagement of a consultant. It seems to me, and I've been on both sides of this relationship, that if the committee decided that particular aspects of that charge could be met by a consultant relationship for $50,000, then you say, here's what we need done. We have $50,000. How would you propose to do this? I'm not sure I would conclude simply because we've got anecdotal information that other towns have spent $150,000 on this. One, either that we have to do that, or two, that it will cost us that much money to get a substantive result. So, again, I would urge you to allow for the flexibility for the committee to use this money in a way that it deems appropriate. I don't think they need startup money. I think they need the ability to purchase expertise at particular points if they see the need to do that, and I think $50,000 gives them some opportunity to do that.
And Anne Marie has already compiled an inventory of all software and all hardware, and so that the committee will be well equipped to start. And we're hoping that they're going to bring expertise to the table. That's the whole goal here.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly like,
Someone said that something about a rush. There's no rush. We've been working on this for over 3 years, trying to get this thing going.
you're talking about the Town Government Study Committee working for 3 years to get
Prior to
an
the
IT
DOR.
committee
It was
article.
one of our original recommendations in the year one.
Saw that,
Yep.
yes. That was 2 years ago.
Was-
Was when your recommendation came out. You may have been working on it for 3, but it's been public for 2. No, I mean, I think it's a fine idea to have an IT committee. I do wish that this article had been published with a price tag on it, so that we might have thought about it a little bit more in advance. You know, we were all, well, many of us were here last year. We had our doubts about the efficacy of a $50,000 grant to get an IT study going, and nothing happened. Well, we found out that the 50 wasn't going to work very well on its own. So it may be that nothing will, you know, satisfactory would happen with a committee working without $50,000, and maybe you have to put the two together in order for anything, you know, fruitful to occur. But I don't know that last year's experience left a lot of us, you know, happy about the situation, and, you know, maybe seeing if a committee could come up with a realistic, targeted, dollar-specific plan by next, you know, January for an appropriation the following year. That kind of makes sense to me. They'd have to get an article in for an appropriation by January. If you can get an IT committee up and running and putting in a request by then, that would be great. And I think that's, you know, that makes sense to me. So, but there's lots of other people around the table too, so.
Well, Ted, I think it depends on whether you think there's any time sensitivity or urgency to the deliberations that they might have and the need to move quickly. If you think that
Well,
that's not the case, then
I don't know, and I'm ready to admit that I might not be the best judge. I do know that the pressing concern has, in terms of town technology, has been solved, I think. Well, I hope, in terms of the financial software.
perspective, I think.
Okay. So I think the most pressing concern perhaps has a solution. As far as the other stuff, it is, I don't know what the problems are. Nobody is telling us, I mean, I think it's grand to have the committee, but nobody is telling me that the committee is essential because we have specific problems. So there is no sense of urgency in my mind beyond the one that we have a recommendation for the town school coordinating committee came up with a recommendation for the software package. And so I don't know where the sense of urgency is. I don't know, I mean, yes, I think it's great to get this thing going, but I don't know where the sense of, you know, I don't know what problems are driving anybody's sense of urgency about this. I would need to hear what the problems are that aren't being addressed, and how $50,000 is going to help address those problems more quickly. So, anyway. Anybody have any other questions on this? We are obviously coming back and talking more on Monday. I hate to postpone everything all the time. We have, I mean, the recommendations that are possible are that you can end it with recommending the formation of the committee and finish it with, and further that the town vote no appropriation under this article. Or you can end it with, and that the town appropriate the sum of blank dollars for the purposes set forth in this article, and to meet said appropriation, the sum can be raised. Now, we could change that to be raised from fiscal year 15 selectmen's budget, if we want to do that. So, I have a, Paul?
Ted, I'd like to make a motion that the committee recommend the writing for this article that includes, and further, that the town vote no appropriation under this article.
Second.
I have a second. Any other questions? Darnell?
No appropriations for me is a problem when you're starting to try to identify issues throughout the town. You're going to need people to come in and do some investigation. You're going to need people to come in and study systems, because, you know, the type of expertise you're going to need to fish out and, you know, ferry out some of these problems. You're going to pay somebody to come in and do some short-term studies. You're going to pay. It's not going to be totally comprehensive, but I can foresee there are issues going forward with trying to get information or need somebody's expertise to come and evaluate outside evaluation. That costs money. It's going to cost money. It's not. It's not going to cost. I'm not going to see it costing $50,000, but I can see a number of different consultants needed. They're going to need to get paid to just basically give us the information we need to make further decisions. To do a zero funding on this article will basically, you know, tie the hands of this committee if set up with the express purposes needed going forward. We could, if we do no funding now, I recommend that we do put some money in our reserve fund so that they can come to us for RFTs to find funding if needed. But there's got to be some money available if we expect them to get anything done this year. There's got to be somewhere they can go or have an expectation of going to get funding to get some of that work done. So that's all I'm saying, because I can foresee going out and needing somebody to come in from the outside. I have to pay somebody to get information that's not going to be available to a 5-person committee running around trying to understand what's happening here and what's actually available to them outside of what they see here right now.
Richard?
It's just not fair.
My only comment would be I can understand the $50,000, but the $50,000 was I can understand your comment, but the $50,000 was had a specific purpose for the RFP. It wasn't for general.
The reprovisioning.
Right, but it wasn't for just generally hiring people to come in ad hoc. It was for a specific RFP. So, if anything, I would say, well, my two options would be either give the $50,000 so it sits there and waits for more, or put the $50,000 back into use somewhere else. I mean, I just don't I don't know why you would say, hey, give some things so that you could use. I mean, that's not what the $50,000 was for.
No, because right now, what the $50,000 was for originally, ends the end of this fiscal year. It just goes. What I'm saying is, we've already basically set that money into IT. I'm doing general IT, not just IT study, but general IT and IT research. I think by one or two ways, basically either moving that money directly into this committee when constituting it, and have them spend it and report back to us what it's getting spent on, because it's not just going to be spent willy-nilly. I'm sure we're going to have checks and balances against that, or understand that this committee is going to need funds to do this type of stuff, and we, as a committee, will be best service to put that money somewhere so they can come and write an RFT against it in the future. So I'm saying there's going to have to be some money available for this committee to basically do its job if we expect them to do anything within that first year. I mean, That's how I view it. So,
Well, within the first year, they'd have to get a more comprehensive strategy put together in terms of getting an article into the warrant by January 1st.
but
I've got Paul and I've got Lee Michael.
$50,000 was set aside last year and the yield was 0. So it also had a specific purpose. I think if the committee is established, they need to have the time. They're not going to be up and running right away, as Phil's pointed out, and I think that's correct. If they come back for an appropriation for more money for a specific purpose later, that's what they should be doing. They could conceivably, I don't know if this would work correctly, but they could conceivably be up and running to the point where maybe they can put in an appropriations article in the October meeting if they get up and running that quickly. But I think until they have a specific purpose for what they're going to do with the money, then I think it would be best to just leave that aside and allow them organically to go through their process and figure out exactly what they need and then come back to town meeting with a specific sum for a specific appropriation.
well, yes.
Darnell.
Yeah, my problem with,
I understand you think you ought to put $50,000
no. I say
into
we should
this
put
situation.
into this situation because we're not just asking them to. You understand? We're not just
Okay.
asking.
What are we asking them to do?
We're asking them
That's gonna cost money. I wish somebody would tell me
We got-
specifically.
Okay.
Okay?
Let's just specifically, if you gave any 5 people in this room and said, "Go ahead, I want you to evaluate I just use something simple, is the Wi-Fi needs for the town, according to the number of systems we have, people who might be using it, the best solutions for the town, what we have, and evaluate those things." The committee here won't be able to give you those numbers because they won't have that expertise. All right, you put 5 people. Now you say, "Oh, we might find somebody who has some of that expertise." What's going to happen in the normal world is you're going to bring somebody in to do that evaluation, because evidently the folks you have doing it right now are not the folks that you want that independence, that you want an independent view on it. You're going to bring someone in to do that evaluation for you, who have the expertise, who can offer you the different solutions you need to get that stuff done. That's going to cost money. And all that information is going to go into a report that's going to come back and say to the warrant committee or to the town, the selectmen, and say, "Okay, guys, based on all the information we got, based on talking with consultants and professionals, this is what we need to go forward. And this is the type of things we need to have
You're
a
not
study."
gonna get that for the
But
$50,000.
you're
That
gonna-
was
no,
already somewhat established.
No, but Ted, what you're looking at is hiring a company to come in and do all the work, outside company coming in. Right now, what we're talking about is having a 5-person committee do some of that running around, some of that legwork that you're expecting someone to do all of that originally by themselves. So I'm gonna have outside company come in and do all that work. $125,000, I think, is generous, honestly, and have them come in, break down all your systems, and do everything else. What we're asking this 5-person committee to do, and this is, and Leroy, your guys correct me if I'm wrong, is to do some of that legwork, and where they run into snags, go outside and bring in professionals to fill the gaps. So that's what I'm hearing and understanding from this committee. So
On a piecemeal basis.
on a piecemeal basis. So
Okay.
yes, and so
All right.
if I'm not representing that properly, please tell me, because
Well,
I mean,
I think you're doing fine, but let me take one more crack at this. The simple answer to your question is, what are we asking them to do? We're asking them to oversee the development of a town-wide information technology strategic plan. We don't have one, we need one. We have hardware, different types of hardware in different departments. We have different types of software in different departments. We have software that's outdated, we got operating systems that are outdated. We don't have an overall strategy. That affects what we buy, how we buy it, who makes the decisions. So I think everyone would agree that integration of that decision-making process and those purchases and that strategy going forward is a good idea. I don't think there's any argument there. So this committee, we're asking to oversee that, to provide the leadership that's necessary to get that done. We went through an RFP process. I agree, it didn't yield the results that we had hoped. But the money for that purpose was there, is there, and I'm just having a little trouble understanding how, since we thought that the purchase of that expertise would require money last time, that we're saying just because we don't know whether $50,000 is enough, and I'm not ready to concede that yet, but let's assume for the moment that's true. We shouldn't allocate anything. I'm not following the logic there.
Well, I think part of the logic is that last year, the money was being put into the selectmen's budget, and they were gonna go out with an RFP, period. There was no committee being set up to consider the necessities for that, for a townwide strategy on IT. This article is in theory, bringing some 5 intelligent people together that are versed in some of these
Absolutely.
These issues.
That's the idea.
And that's the difference between last year and this.
But we didn't think, and we don't think, that those people are gonna be able to do all the work. This is a committee.
No, we think
it's
they're gonna need $125,000.
I'm not sure about that, Ted. I'm not sure about that.
It might be 75.
It might be 75.
Might be 40.
But, it might be 45. But to Darnell's point, you can divide this into logical, smaller pieces that advance the overall task that don't get it done all at once. Like to say, we're not gonna allocate anything, it leaves them for months at a time with no funding, which doesn't make any sense. It's $50,000 that we had for this specific purpose.
Is it,
Okay, I still have a motion on the table, and I have Lee Michael and I have Steve asking questions. John, can you hang on?
oh, sure.
Thank you, I appreciate that, because they've been hanging on for quite a while. Lee Michael.
There are a couple of warrant committee members who have raised questions, and with respect to the amount of work that's already been done on this, most of this group of people is coming back on Monday night already. I thought you were going to go in this direction earlier, but we ended up getting the motion first. I wonder if we could allow them the opportunity, as we are on a couple other articles, to go and regroup and come back again with their rationale.
That's, you're asking Paul, who made the motion, to withdraw it in order to satisfy that.
Until Monday.
So without going to Steve or John or Rich, the question is to you. Would you care to withdraw that and pick this up again on Monday, next Monday?
I think I'd rather just hear what the rest of the people at the table have to say first.
Okay. I've got Steve and Richard, Steve and John and Richard, excuse me.
All right, I'm trying to get clear in my head here. We're proposing to use FY15 money to fund this.
Which hasn't been spent.
Which hasn't been spent, it hasn't been encumbered. Does it need to be encumbered by the end of the fiscal year?
It's in the budget. It's in the budget, and they have no contract, so it can't be encumbered. It has to be reappropriated by the town meeting.
It's an appropriation.
As an FY16 appropriation.
Steve, it's an FY16 appropriation from a prior year.
And that, you can just, you don't have to let it roll to free cash
No.
and then do it, you can just
No.
do it. And we're sure of that.
You can transfer.
That's what we do.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
You know,
Amy's sure.
I would like to, Paul, to propose that we let this slide until Monday. You know, Phil made the point before that that this is possibly going to be even seeded is after town meeting. And, you know, we're going to be well into FY16. You know, you had floated the idea of them coming in fall town meeting and asking for an appropriation.
Which
that
doesn't
money will
fly.
be gone. There won't be any.
Right.
We ran into that problem last fall. So we either have to decide to put some 16 money to this, or just let them get started, let them get organized, started, and then come in with the full boat proposal or some piece of it later on. And I'm not ready to make that call myself right now, and I'd like that extra time to hear a little more information.
Okay, John?
I hope Paul's going to allow us to have some extra time, but just a little bit off the subject, from a point of history, it was 24 years ago that the town bought its first computer. Some of you may recognize this model, Radio Shack TRS-80.
Yes.
Nobody remembers it? And it was in the police department, $55,800, and it was funded by Copeland, Swift Fund, Milton Lodge of Masons, and several other groups and individuals. I don't think it's in service now. But well, we haven't
Might be a doorstop, maybe.
Kevin, help me. We have a Braintree company who is our software provider.
Right, but they've changed their name.
That's right. And they've changed the name, but they're still our software we're using. Very old,
Right.
very archaic, insufficient, and Amy, our town accountant, and Jim Scory, our IT guy, came before the board and made a very emphatic plea to the town government study committee to get this IT stuff going again, get the committee going again, because that system is not going to be supported after next year.
That's right.
And that's the urgency that and Leroy mentioned it, but it didn't seem to register. There is an urgency that we get going on this, and I hope that you can see clear to transfer the funds that were appropriated for this general purpose to the new committee.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I'd be fine waiting till Monday, but I would say my answer will probably be the same Monday as it would be now. I think I was very confused with some of the conversations that we were having, but the last comment you made kind of put it in perspective for me, because it almost seemed like the $50,000, well, we couldn't get the RFP, so maybe things might come up, we might use it, but I think what I'm hearing from you is we may not have the RFP, but maybe we could slice it up in chunks and do things. So my point of view would be, I mean, I would vote for it, because we've already appropriated money, as long as it gets used for what the purpose that we planned on it being used for. And it sounds like, or the portion of, which, you know what, is better than nothing, because they're probably not gonna get another $100 grand for a while from us.
Right.
So you might as well take the 50 and run with it. Right. And what I didn't understand is, from the beginning conversation, is I didn't know that that was possible. It almost sounded to me like the RFP is what it is. Right. You can't do anything about it, but it sounds to me like you probably could cut it up.
I think that's right.
So, I mean, it's up to you guys what you want to do, but I mean, that's a much better conversation than we were 20 minutes ago.
I have Katie and Tom.
Yeah, just throwing out a suggestion. We do have, the capital committee is recommending $160,000 for a piece of software that really, when we get all said and done, it's going to cost between $250 and $275. 50 grand repurposed into that software is a known commodity. Does buy us another module for that software that that we certainly could use, and gets it a little bit further. But perhaps if this IT committee, at least to give it some money to get started with, because I strongly believe by the time you strategize and get the committee established, you're going to be well into next year before it really gets much accomplished. But to maybe take that 50 grand and give 10 or 15 to the IT committee and repurpose the rest of it to the new accounting software, to make that 160, something closer to 200.
Oh, okay. So we have another wrinkle. All right.
Too many options.
Katie, did you have something to add, or that was Tom? Okay. Thank you. Paul?
Given the conversation around the table, I'll withdraw my motion.
So we'll come back Monday on this thing and.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know, I hope I'm not just speaking for myself. I really appreciate your time putting all this stuff together. I really wish that $50,000 price tag had been attached to that article when it was presented to us on paper in January, because it would have helped us prepare for this evening. And I would really like to see some example of how the job of this committee could put $50,000 to use. You know, whether it's in $5,000 pieces or what. But I would like to see some sort of a idea on that, because otherwise I'm just feeling like last year was 50 without a committee, and this year at least we got a committee. How are they going to do anything more than 50 than the Board of Selectmen, you know? So, at any rate, thank you very much for coming in, Rick. And we'll pick it up, and on Monday, we do have, before, just to let you know, on Monday, the first thing we're going to be doing is hearing from a citizen's petition on a moratorium on signs, okay? So that'll be first, and but I hope can't be as confusing as this one, so, you know, what the hell. You know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This is a great question for Rotary, wasn't it? So that's still on.
All right.
Still
I'd like to have a 5-minute break and come back and take care of a few things. Okay? Thanks.